Be seat. Start out in this evening. Nice to see you guys. And so as we settle into that seat, really just thinking about how we can get our spine vertical so that we can be at ease. And that really is the big ask, the big task. Just looking for ease in a seat. Think about the physical adjustments that you have available so that your seat can be more comfortable or weightless. And then eventually you can start to be more focused and aware of your breath. Give ourselves just about 60 more seconds. Just being aware and being at ease as much as possible. When it feels appropriate for you, letting the eyes drift open if they are closed. And then let's take our right arm behind us, the palm away from the body, back of the hand towards the body. So we get a little bit of capture on that right shoulder, and we're just going to turn over towards the left. Thinking about keeping that right shoulder retracted, not letting it fall down towards the hips or forward towards the front of your rim. And then we'll turn over towards the right. And then we'll relax back to neutral. Let that right arm relax, and we'll do the same thing to the left side. So left hand comes behind you, palm away, back of the hand towards the body, and we'll turn over towards the right. Keeping some awareness on that left shoulder now, not letting it fall down or forward, just staying really activated there. And then we'll turn over towards the left. And then eventually, when you feel balanced left to right, we'll come back to neutral, release both arms, and let's bring the bottoms of the feet together. And just creating that little bit of engagement there, we'll take ourselves forward into a seated fold. Opportunity to just address the low back here. Assuming that medial hip space is allowing you to. You may feel this completely in that abductor musculature. And we'll give ourselves just 15 more seconds here. And then when it feels appropriate for you, bring the spine back to vertical and let's transition to hands and knees tabletop. So a tabletop here where you can feel really planted with the hands, really anchored with those points of contact, and we'll work into a cat shape with an exhale. So exhaling out, letting the middle of the back round, the chin tuck, the tailbone tuck. And then inhaling into that extension articulation, our cow shape. Chin lifts, tailbone lifts, belly drops. And then exhaling back into your cat shape, chin tucks, tailbone tucks, back arches, and just move with your breath here so that you start to articulate the spine in the rate and duration that feels most beneficial to you, in the way that feels most beneficial to you. But really allowing for the exploration of your spinal articulation. You probably can't articulate the spine too much. It just feels like we could do an hour of cat cow and it would be pretty beneficial for all of us. Eventually, we'll come back to neutral and let's curl our toes and lift the seat back into down dog and just get that little exploration of depth for your down dog here. And then we'll come down to hands and knees tabletop and sink back into child's pose. Again, another exploration for spinal depth, spinal expansion, here with a relatively neutral articulation. And we'll just give ourselves about 15 more seconds here just to settle in to the hips, to the spine before we start to move a little bit. And then as it feels appropriate, we'll pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop.
from hands and knees tabletop, let's curl the toes, lift the seat, and find our way back into down dog once again. Craft that depth here. And then we'll walk our way forward into fold. Inhale into half lift. And then exhale back into fold. Settle all the way into that fold space. Really allow that dimension of depth. And then we'll drift our awareness to our sacrum. We'll roll ourselves up vertebrae by vertebrae. Nice and controlled as we unwind here. Eventually, we'll find our way to mountain. Bring the hands together at heart center. And just think about crafting balance left to right. When it feels appropriate for you, hands staying at heart center. So we kind of keep that torso neutrality. We'll slide the left foot back into lunge. And we just find the initial opportunity for how that anterior sheath of musculature responds. And then let's interlace the fingers, and we're going to push the palms away from us as we step forward. So we land with the arms extended out in front of us. If this doesn't feel appropriate for the shoulders, feel free to do the palms towards you always. If it feels accessible either way, palms down or palms up, we're going to lift those arms up and overhead so that we get that big vertical expansion. And then we'll release the hands back to heart center. Settle into that heart center space. And we'll slide the right foot straight back into lunge. We land and we anchor here and we feel that sheath of musculature receive. And then we'll interlace the fingers, push those arms out in front of us and help step forward. Once you craft that, we'll inhale and take those arms up and overhead so that we get that big full extension. Really lengthen out the body, and then we'll release the hands back to heart center. And from heart center, we'll just take ourselves into fold. Note how your low back responds coming off of that extension space. We'll plant our hands. We'll walk ourselves back into down dog. As you get back into down dog, drive the energy from the hands into the hips. Really think about that transfer of energy from the hands up into, let's see if I, up into that shoulder space. And then from the shoulders back through the torso into the hips. And then we'll come down to hands and knees tabletop, flip the tops of the feet, and sink back into child's pose once again. And as you drift into that child's pose and you compress the hips and you relax through the breath, think about crafting space here. Space with the breath and space with those tiny adjustments that you can make, those modifications that you can make to craft maximum benefit. And then when it feels appropriate, let's pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop. From hands and knees tabletop, we are going to replace the hands with the elbows. So we come down onto the forearms. And so forearms down, 90-degree bend at the elbow, hands engaged here. So push down on those hands and then curl your toes like you're gonna push back into dolphin. We're not going to though. We're just gonna sink the hips back towards the heels. The more engagement you have in the hands, the more you get on that lat expansion. And you can also, capture that medial line, the quadratus laborum, the big straps of musculature on either side of the spinal column. And then we'll pull the torso forward, keep the 90-degree bend at that elbow space. And let's take our right elbow to the middle of the mat here. And then the left hand can just come on the hip and we'll take that big twist. So the hip should stay roughly at equivalent depth. And the rotation should be pretty lumbar specific, lumbar to thoracic specific, the union between that two. There we go. And then we'll relax back and we'll take this to the second side. So left hand plants, left elbow stays middle of the body, right hand to the hip. You take that twist. The hips stay relatively flat, but the upper lumbar really rotates so that it can match the angle of the thoracic spine. And then we'll come back to neutral, lift ourselves up to hands and knees tabletop, curl your toes and rock back into down dog. And so we're trying now to encapsulate, to capture that upper lumbar space. It's a super hard spot to get to expand. Coming out of the twist, we have a little bit more potential, but really try to push back and then suck the hips back into that full depth. And then we'll walk our way forward into fold. Inhale into half lift. Exhale back into fold. Sink all the way into the fold and try to get that high lumbar to relax again, to expand again. And then we'll drift our awareness to our sacrum and we'll roll ourselves up vertebrae by vertebrae. Coming into that top space. And we'll bring our hands together, heart center. Yeah, beautiful. The left foot sliding straight back into lunge, and then hands are staying together, left heel grounds. We turn the torso towards torso warrior two, but the hands don't extend into the shape. Think about crafting that front quad, getting that front quad into as much depth as is possible. And then let's take our torso towards that front quad. It does not mean that the torso is laying on the front quad. It just means we're going in that direction. And then we're going to pull right back up. And then we're going to blossom into the two. Width through the hips. So peeling open into the hips. Eventually left heel spins up and we find crescent. And then we'll step forward. Back into mountain. Relax, find your equilibrium, but weight distribution. Eventually, when you're ready, the right foot slides back. It lands and we stabilize. We ground the right heel, keep the hands together, and roll ourselves into warrior two legs, warrior two torso. We just don't add the arms. Then we smooth into that front quad. Really think about getting that down into your full depth. We'll take our torso towards that quad. Just trying to activate here. And then we'll rise back up and blossom into two. Right heel spins up, we're into crescent, hands drop, and we return to the front of the mat. Now we have a little bit of quad fatigue. We're gonna play with that by sinking back into chair. So quads have a little bit of extra engagement to them. It makes the chair harder. Really try to get your glutes back into this shape. Don't let your weight rock forward. Really stay back. Eventually, we'll release the hands down to the mat, push back through the hamstrings. Inhale to half lift. Exhale back into fold. Plant your hands and we'll walk our way back into down dog. Come down to hands and knees. We'll flip the tops of the feet and sink back into child's pose. Settling into this child's pose and really letting your body receive here. So there's this relatively young artist. She's also a remarkably successful artist.
She's a remarkably well-known artist. Because she's been so successful, because her art's been so appreciated, she's been able to sell these sculptures that she makes for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars. And that has translated into a very early retirement, or at least the opportunity for an early retirement. And she's decided to move into this very tiny remote village. She's so used to being in big cities and being recognized and people coming to see her that she's looking to experience a different side of life. And so she picks this very remote village and she moves her life there. And she doesn't really tell anyone what she does. She opens this little tiny art studio and no one even cares she's there. No one even looks in the art studio, let alone opens the door to come in. Last 15 seconds here. When you're ready, we'll pull ourselves forward to hands and knees tabletop. From hands and knees tabletop, curling the toes, lifting the seat, pressing back into down dog, getting all the way back into that depth, transitioning the energy from your hands to your hips. When you feel like you can no longer get any extra additional energy transfer, then we'll walk forward to the front of the mat. And from the front of the mat, we'll just inhale into half lift. Exhale back into fold, then send our right foot straight back and behind us. As the right foot lands, bring your right hand right underneath your right shoulder. Take your left hand up to your left thigh, and then press down into that left thigh to get a little bit of additional leverage into your rotation. So you can start to take that torso into the twist, maybe even gazing up towards the ceiling or sky. And then we'll release back to neutral and we'll step forward into fold. Inhale into half lift. Exhale back into fold. Second side, left foot slides straight back. Left hand comes underneath the shoulder. Right hand comes onto the right thigh. Push down into that right hand and use that as leverage to help additional rotation here. Finding that capacity to rotate to get every last little bit of rotational capacity. And then eventually we'll relax back to neutral, hands plant, and we'll step forward into fold. Inhale into half lift. Exhale back into fold. Settle all the way back into the fold. Grab opposite elbows. Rock a little side to side. Think about that area at the very top of the lumbar spine, just below the start of the rib cage. And as you move laterally, try to allow that space to relax, to expand. They're kind of interrelated because the musculature gets very tight. It's trying to kind of protect the mobility where it transfers into the immobility of the thoracic spine. So the more we can relax there, the more we can expand. When you're ready, awareness drifts to the sacrum, and we'll roll ourselves up vertebrae by vertebrae. And this top space, eventually coming to mountain, bringing the hands together at heart center. Let's take our left foot and slide it straight back into lunge. And then we'll ground the left heel. And hands staying with us again, we're going to slide back into the right hamstring. So we craft triangle legs this time, hands staying at heart center. We're just going to take our torso forward towards what would be triangle, right? If we extended the arms down, we extend the arms up, we're in triangle. We're just keeping our hands at heart center for a little modification. And then we'll rise back up, blossom the arms up and overhead, and let those fingers come together. Point our fingers towards the ceiling and we'll extend and then blossom into warrior two. Settle all the way into that space. Nice work. Left heel spins up. We are into crescent. Hands drop to heart center, and we'll step to the front of the mat. Reconnecting to our breath. Eventually, as it feels appropriate for you, right foot slides back, right heel grounds. We turn the torso, then we'll slide back into the left hamstring. Really think about keeping that alignment, keeping the hands at heart center, and then we lean our way forward into this modified version of triangle. Triangle without the arm requirement. Eventually, we'll blossom back up, arms extend overhead, index fingers come together. We extend straight up, really thinking about that length between the bottom and the top of the lumbar. And then blossoming into warrior two, that front knee bends and we find our way into that shape. The right heel spins up when we come into crescent. And then we'll drop the hands to heart center and return to the front of your mat. When it feels appropriate, sinking the seat back towards chair, keeping that nice vertical lower leg structure. Pushing back through the hamstrings, finding your way into fold. Walking back into down dog. And then coming down to hands and knees tabletop. And sinking back into child's pose once again. Kind of using child's pose this evening instead of any of the cobra-esque shapes as our recovery and as our reset of our spine. And so as this artist watches the people of this little village, the thing that she continually notices is they don't seem happy. And it starts to wear on her. It starts to wear on her that she's this world-renowned artist. And even though they don't know her, they see her art and they don't appreciate it. Or maybe worse, they don't even see her art to appreciate. But they're also surrounded by this tranquil setting and this beauty. And for whatever reason, the people that she sees through her shop window just don't seem to be enjoying life. And that is crushing because she moved here to enjoy life. One day she's thinking about this problem when she sees this sign posted for a yogi. It happens to be a yogi she knows, who she's practiced with before, and she's coming to teach here in this village. Just pure happenstance. Last 15 seconds here. When it feels appropriate, we'll pull ourselves forward to hands and knees. Tabletop. From tabletop, we'll curl the toes, lift the seat, find our way back into that down dog space. Get that depth, craft that length. From that length, we'll walk our way forward into fold. And from fold, we'll inhale into half lift. Exhale back into fold. Drift our awareness to our sacrum. We'll roll or sweep our way up into mountain. And for mountain, check and ensure that your feet are that 2 fist distance. And then let's bring our hands together at heart center. We're going to sink back into chair. And from chair, take your right elbow and place it on your left thigh. So we get this nice spinal rotation. And then we'll come back to neutral. And then the left elbow will come over to the right thigh. And then we'll come back to neutral. We'll rise up. Slide our right foot straight back into lunge. Establish the lunge points first, right? So bend is removed from the back knee. We're strong in the back quad. Then our right elbow is coming onto our left thigh. And so we get that same rotational capacity. And then we'll sweep back up into crescent. And slide forward as the hands come to heart center. When it feels appropriate, we'll sink our seat back into chair. The left elbow will come onto the right thigh. Coming back to neutral, right elbow to left thigh. Coming back to neutral, rising all the way up. And then left foot slides back into lunge. From lunge, left elbow to right thigh. Get that full capacity for twist. Really think about your rotation here. Foundation of the shape, right lunge, and then we just think about how much we can rotate. And then we'll sweep back up into crescent. Hands drop and we'll return to the front of the mat. Inhale and sweep your arms up and overhead. Exhale through forward fold. Bottom of your fold, we'll grab opposite elbows and rock a little side to side. Letting the weight of your torso help you expand. Letting the relaxation of that musculature help you expand. And maybe one more time in each direction, and then we'll come back to neutral and we'll roll ourselves up nice and slow. Unwinding back into mountain. And from mountain, we'll bring our hands together at heart center. Let's slide our left foot straight back into lunge. Ground our left heel. Keep the hands with you at heart center as you rotate. Get yourself into this rotated space and then slide back into your right hamstring. Let your right hand, let's take left hand to the left hip and then just let your right hand kind of start to slide down towards another modified triangle. And from this space, just feeling into where you're feeling the restriction, and then we'll slowly slide our way back up. Now, spin your left heel up and come into crescent, and then float the hands down to the mat. As the hands come down to the mat, ground your left heel, and then slide back into your right hamstring. And now this might be enough. This might feel like it's enough. If you want to take this one more step,
the left hand can plant and the right hand can take you into a revolved triangle. And then the right hand will come down, left heel spins up, and we'll sweep ourselves up and into crescent. Hands drop, and we return to the front of the mat. Easy, fluid breath here. When it feels appropriate with the hands at heart center, right foot slides back. We find our way to side 2. Right heel grounds, hands stay at heart center. Slide back into your left hamstring. Right hand to right hip. Let the left hand just slide down that left leg. Just feeling into where the limitation or restriction is coming from. And then we'll slide back up. Spin the right heel up and find our way into crescent. And then drop the hands down to the mat. As the hands come down to the mat, we'll ground our right heel and then slide back into our left hamstring. And this might feel like it's enough. If you do want to go another step, right hand plants, left hand reaches up for a nice revolved triangle. Eventually the left hand comes down, the right heel spins up, and we'll sweep ourselves into crescent. And then drop the hands and return to the front of the mat. Nice work. Sweep the arms up and overhead. Exhale through forward fold. Inhale into half lift. Exhale back into fold. Plant your hands. We'll walk back into down dog. From down dog, we'll come down to hands and knees. Flip the tops of the feet. And sink back into child's pose. And so this artist, she's so excited that this yogi's coming. And she goes and she sits through this yogi's presentation. And it's all about joy. And she looks around. There's very few of the members of the community there. There are very few people there in general, but most of the people that are there have traveled from outside. And so afterwards, she runs up to the yogi. She gives her a big hug. You know, they have a nice little reunion because they practiced together before. And then she says, you know, I need your help. And the yogi's like, well, what could you possibly need from me? She explains the situation, how she's moved to this little tiny village and how the people here just don't, they're just not happy. They don't practice this joy. We'll give ourselves just 20 more seconds here. And so the yogi listens to everything and she says, okay, meet me tomorrow in the center of town at sunrise, and I will explain to you what you need to do. When you're ready, we'll pull ourselves forward to hands and knees, tabletop. And from hands and knees, tabletop, we'll extend our legs straight out in front of us into staff. And from staff, we'll take ourselves forward into fold. And from that fold, we'll just breathe. Just find some ease. And so the next morning, the artist wakes up. She makes her way down to the center of the village at sunrise. The yogi's waiting for her. And when she gets there, the yogi pulls out this very tattered copper water vessel. She hands it over and she says, I want you to go to the well at the edge of town, and I want you to fill this water vessel to the very brim. And when it's filled to the very brim, I want you to bring it back to me, and I don't want you to spill a single drop. The artist tries to ask a question. The yogi waves her off and says, nope, go. And so she does. The artist makes her way over to the edge of town. She finds the well. She fills this water vessel all the way to the brim. And then very carefully, with the utmost concentration, the utmost focus, she starts to walk this water vessel back towards the yogi. Meanwhile, the villagers in town are starting to go about their days. They're starting to open their shops. They're running around. They're doing their things. And she doesn't even notice them. And they're, doing their thing. They don't notice her either. We'll give ourselves just about 30 more seconds here. And when it feels appropriate, walking ourselves up into seat and lowering ourselves onto our back for a little spinal appreciation. Just releasing here so that you can really feel what you have done for yourself so far in class. We'll give ourselves about 30 more seconds just to settle in. Pay attention to kind of the high lumbar where we were focused, the low lumbar, which had to respond to the high lumbar. See how those two spots are setting and feeling. And then eventually, when it feels appropriate, the bottoms of the feet can come together and the knees can fall out wide. And so very slowly, this artist is able to bring this water vessel full of water from the well all the way back to the yogi. She gets it back to the yogi, and the yogi looks at it, and the water is absolutely to the brim. Like she didn't spill a single drop. She looks at her and she says, that's very impressive. She takes the water vessel and she drinks it all immediately. And then the yogi turns back to the artist and says, okay, now I want you to go back into the village and I want you to disrupt the villagers' mornings. And again, she tries to ask a question, but the yogi waves her away and says, nope, go, go. Last 20 seconds here. When you're right, knees come back to neutral, and then we'll add a little sway. Just moving your knees in a way that feels soothing. And whatever that means to you after all of this spinal work. Maybe one more time in each direction. And then we'll let the knees fall over to the left side. And so this artist goes out into the village and she tries to disrupt people's mornings. And so she sees this group of people walking and they're kind of hustling off to work. They're walking right down the sidewalk and she stops in the middle of the sidewalk and they just separate and go right around her and go about their way. And she sees someone tending to some flowers. And she goes over and she starts to pick some of the flowers right in the next area where this gardener was going to work. And the gardener just goes right around her into the next grouping of flowers. Last 10 seconds here on this first side. And then when it feels appropriate, we'll bring our knees back to neutral. And then we'll let the knees fall over to the second side, settling into side two. And so she keeps going around the village and trying to change the way people interact with their day. But everything she tries is very quickly bypassed. And she recognizes, it's kind of the same thing. People, in the same way people walk by her shop every day without paying much attention. If she gets in the way, if she changes something, they just move on to the next thing. It's not a big deal for them. And they're certainly not changing their morning for it. And so try as she might, she's unsuccessful. And she kind of sulks back to the yogi who's waiting for her in the center of town. And the yogi says, and so how'd it go? Last 10 seconds here on side two. And then when it feels appropriate, we'll bring our knees back to neutral. With the knees at neutral, we'll
ask ourselves if there's anything that we might want, need, desire, benefit from prior to Shavasana. And if there is, we'll offer that to ourselves now. If we have everything that we need, we'll drift into a shape where we can appreciate Shavasana and we'll just settle in. So she kind of sheepishly looks back at the yogi and says, I didn't succeed. I couldn't change people's mornings. The yogi smiles, says, well, maybe it's best you focus on the water. When it feels appropriate for you, just finding your version of Shavasana this evening. And so the artist looks back at the yogi and she says, "What do you mean? Focus on the water." Well, the water was in the water vessel. You were in control of the water vessel. Focus on the things you can control. And with that, she turns and she moves on to the next village. We'll start to bring some movement to our fingers and our toes, into our wrists and our ankles, elbows and knees, shoulders and hips, neck, head, jaw, eyes, tongue. Eventually, the entirety of the body will move, and we'll utilize that movement to transition from the shapes we are in back into a seat. As you reestablish the verticality of the spine, again, opportunity to feel those 2 points, the bottom of the lumbar and the top of the lumbar, and think about adjusting so that that spinal stack realigns and you feel weightless. We'll let our eyes close. And when it feels appropriate, we'll inhale our hands together, heart center. Over the course of the next 7 days, can you remind yourself that trying to change others is a fool's errand, but having the courage to change yourself is a revolution? And see how that impacts your experience. Thank you so much for being a part of this evening's practice and for being you. Namaste. Happy Monday, guys. Appreciate the heck out of you being here. Hope you have a beautiful evening and a beautiful week. I'll be back on Sunday to recharge, and we'll do this movement thing again next Monday. Love the heck out of you. Welcome back, Annie. Heck yeah. Nice to see you. Glad you're having fun out there.